Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another session in the symposium, Earth Climate Dreams, Depth Psychological Reflections in the Age of the Anthropocene. And as most of you know by now, I'm your host, Bonnie Bright, and I'm also the founder of Depth Psychology Alliance, which is an open community for everyone who's interested in depth and Jungian psychologies. And of course, I've mentioned many times, I think that depth psychology has just had a really profound effect on my own life. And so the mission of Depth Psychology Alliance is really to make it more accessible to everyone. And I think as we go through the symposium, we're learning more about what that actually means and some of the depth psychological techniques that we can each use to transform our lives. But more than that is the title of the symposium, Earth, Climate, and Dreams, Depth Psychological Reflections in the Age of the Anthropocene. And of course, this is really stemming from my own profound interest in the planet and our relationship to nature and relationship to the planet. And I'm here today with Jungian analyst, Dr. Erel Shalit. Hi, Erel. Thanks so much for being here with me.
Hi, Bonnie, and thank you for inviting me to this exciting seminar.
Well, I really appreciate you being here, and especially because I have found on so many occasions that our interests have aligned, particularly around this topic, around the idea of modernity and how we are as human beings in a modern world, and the needs around establishing some context and some additional consciousness, I think, around our relationships to Earth, to the climate, to the planet, and particularly by paying attention to some of our dreams and the symbolism that arises for each of us, even in waking dreams. This often is the case. But I wonder if we can start by talking a little bit about a topic that may not have occurred to everybody, and that is the idea of memory. Because we learn so much from the past if and when we're willing to look at it. But like so many people have said, we often tend to repeat our mistakes. And so if our memory is not serving us, if our memory is failing us, then we begin to get into some trouble in that arena, and it starts to contribute to the issues that we have today around the ecological crisis. Can you talk a bit about how you feel about the idea of memory? I mean, are we losing our memory? What is the connection there?
I think that we do risk losing our memory. And maybe I first need to apologize that I might cough and sneeze here and there. I'm recovering from the common cold, which is something that obviously they haven't managed to create an app that resolves that problem yet. Thankfully, I guess we do need sometimes these compensatory reminders of the fact that we are simple human beings, and we walk on this earth and the planet, and we are exposed to pollution, viruses, and we are not fully immune, and we should not, I believe, become fully sterile. And hopefully we won't become that anytime soon either. And as regards memory, yes, I think that we are in danger. Memory is such an essential thing. It's a basis for civilization. The creation of memory is one of the first things that the infant experiences and has to acquire. That is, I believe, why the infant dreams a lot. The infant dreams much more than an adult or an old person. The premature baby dreams most of the time. And if an infant sleeps most of the time and dreams a lot of that time. And I think that is in order to turn the actual experience, which can be a craving, a sense of hunger, a sense of pain or discomfort, it's brought into the psyche. It's by the process of psychization, which is essential to civilization, for us to be civilized beings and not only barbarians. And in that process, we create memory, which initially, as Jung said, were little islands. They are little islands, and they become connected in the process of psychization. But we are today quite willingly handing over our memory to all our devices. We no longer remember telephone numbers because they are in our contact list and we just push the right button. And we hand over much of our memory to the hard disk. In fact, Vince Cerf, who was one of the creators of the internet, he has warned us that we might sometime soon enter a digital dark age when software and hardware programs become obsolete and everything is deleted. The importance of memory is maybe primarily seen as many other things when there is problem. The big problem of memory is when Alzheimer hits us. It's a cruel onslaught on memory. It's a cruel onslaught on our sense of human pride. In Alzheimer, we lose much of our human pride. We lose much of whom we are, our sense of identity. It's mostly visible for others, and the person, him or herself, may not always, except in maybe initial stages, be aware of it. But in a way, we run the risk of entering an Alzheimerian era where we willingly turn over our memory and leave it to the devices. And I think that might be a big danger.
Well, you know what? I'm laughing to myself like crazy over here because in my excitement to jump into the topic and to have this conversation with you, I realized, of course, that I forgot to remember to read your bio, which I had promised to do for everybody so that we would have some context for you. So I'm going to do that now, but I want to come back to the idea of memory and whether or not we are actually handing that over to machines and what that might mean for us as a collective. So let's put a placeholder right there for just a second, and then I'm going to go back and read the bio now. And it's really quite ironic, is it not, that this was the topic that I kind of launched into right away. But it speaks to something that's really important, I think, in our culture, and that is both the pace at which we move, sometimes our lack of capacity to really be centered, particularly in front of a machine. So here I am in front of my computer watching you on the camera and moving windows around and doing all kinds of juggling to try to get to all the information and things that I need while still looking at you. And I just want to share that with our audience because, frankly, I think that it's a very interesting image, I think, of just where we are sort of in our culture today in our relationship with machines and memory.
And we sometimes need to forget things as well.
Yes.
It's important. It's important to be able to forget things. It's important to be able to exclude things from our minds. Certain theories, about autism, especially the savant sauvage, is the risk of taking in too much. And I think that's the other pole of the era in which we are living. We believe that we can accumulate unlimited information. And we get a bit mixed up. We think that information is knowledge, and we think that knowledge is understanding. Knowledge is important. Information is very important, but we should not be confused. Information is information. It's not necessarily knowledge. And knowledge does not necessarily mean that we have an understanding. It depends on what kind of knowledge and what we do with that knowledge. The way that we relate to the information and the knowledge that we have. So an abundance of information is at the other end of the issue of memory.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I can certainly relate to it and see how that it can create fragmentation for us. And that is also something that I think we'll want to talk about a little bit as we're discussing our own relationship to both modernity and the environment around us. Let me go ahead and read the bio, and then we can continue down that track. So Dr. Erel Shalit is a Jungian psychoanalyst in Tel Aviv, past president of the Israel Society of Analytical Psychology. He was founding director of the Jungian Analytical Psychotherapy Program at Bar Ilan University, and a past director of the Shammai Davidson Community Mental Health Clinic at the Shalvata Psychiatric Center in Israel. In April 2015, he chaired the Jung-Neumann Conference in Kibbutz Shefayim, Israel, and in June 2016, a symposium at Pacifica Graduate Institute, Creative Minds in Dialogue, the relationship between C.G. Jung and Erich Neumann. And I know that Erich Neumann has been a huge influence for you, and you've done some really profound work with his, so I hope that we can also dig into a little bit of his thoughts on some of this as we go. He's the author of several books, among them The Cycle of Life, Themes and Tales of the Journey, Enemy, Cripple, and Beggar, Shadows in the Hero's Path, The Complex, Path of Transformation from Archetype to Ego, The Hero and His Shadow, Psycho-Political Aspects of Myth and Reality in Israel, and the novella Requiem, A Tale of Exile and Return. And with Nancy Swift-Berlotti, who is also a participant on this particular symposium, he has edited The Dream and Its Amplification, which is a remarkable collection of essays from other depth psychologically oriented practitioners all about dreams. And Erel is also the editor of Jacob and Esau on the collective symbolism of the brother motif, a previously unpublished book by Erich Neumann, and Turbulent Times, Creative Minds, Erich Neumann and C.G. Jung in Relationship, co-edited with Murray Stein, as well as the author of a forthcoming book on the human soul in transition and the dawn of a new era. And of course, that latter is really a lot of what we're digging into here today, and we've already begun that conversation, as you all know, through some of the conversation about memory or lack thereof, and also fragmentation. And what we were just getting into, Erel, as we pick that thread back up again, was something about the fact that you mentioned that sometimes that overwhelm of information is really the opposite of memory. And it contributes to, I think, a mass forgetting. And I wonder sometimes if that addiction on some level to information in an era that is just so fast paced and where we have access to so many different kinds of media, if that is not almost a coping mechanism sometimes for us to forget or distract ourselves from the reality of what actually is going on the planet and in our culture and our relationship to the crisis that seems to be kind of unfolding around us.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would like to say a few words about that. Let me first compliment you on your Hebrew, which sounds good.
I practiced.
Yeah, memory. Memory can sometimes be very soothing and loving, but it can also be very painful. And we deal quite a lot. The last few decades, there has been an increase in dealing with post-trauma. And post-trauma has to do with experiencing something that the person who suffers from the post-trauma is not able to wrestle him or herself out of. The memory, which can be kept in the body and the mind, holds the person in its grip. The survivor syndrome, which was a term coined in relation to Holocaust survivors, and which is applicable, of course, in other contexts of genocide and major catastrophe, makes memory unbearable, creates so much pain that it has been suggested to develop the forgetting pill, to take the pill that makes you forget and therefore disconnect from the trauma? Well, it might be that if we have experienced severe trauma, we would love to just forget it. But we do pay a price for the impact of human interventions where we not always should intervene in such drastic and maybe somewhat simplistic ways. If we lose our memories, we are not going to lose only the memory of the bad. We inevitably will lose the memory of history. We might enter a memoryless age, and memory and history began when the human was able to put things into writing, when the oral tradition was kept generation after generation, added to that the writing, and we, with the abundance of information that we often search intuitively, associatively, jumping from website to website, for instance, we accumulate often at a very superficial level information that gives us instant gratification, which is not necessarily bad if it, unless it becomes the absolute dominant, which I'm afraid it has become or is becoming. And therefore, memory of what was gets lost. There is a wonderful story, by the way, a Japanese story about the burning fields, where the story goes like this, that the villagers are down in the village near the sea celebrating, the harvest, and only the old grandfather stays watching his rice fields on top of the mountain. He's there together with his grandchild. Suddenly he calls his grandchild and gives him a torch and tells him to put the rice fields on fire. The grandson says, "Grandpa, what's happening? You're going crazy." And the grandfather himself then starts putting the rice fields on fire. And suddenly the villagers look up at the mountain and see that there is a fire, and they all start rushing up in order to, in order to help extinguish the fire. And the grandchild tells the villagers, "Grandpa went totally crazy. He's the one who put the rice on fire." And the grandfather tells the people, the villagers, "Look out over the sea." And they see that suddenly the sea has become wild and is sweeping forcefully inland and is destroying all the houses and streets where they were celebrating the harvest down near the sea. He was the only one who remembered what a tsunami is. Everybody had forgotten. So memory is essential in so many ways. And I think this story has such an impact, especially since we have experienced the tsunami a decade or so ago with its horrendous impact.
Yes.
And so just to add another word about memory and post-trauma, I think that in the modern era, and have moved into the postmodern era, or I mean, the boundary may be very fluid. In the modern era, humanity experienced so much pain by totalitarian regimes, by Nazism and fascism, and so much death and destruction made by the perfection of machinery and the killing machines, that as a compensation, I think we often try to avoid the pain that comes with memory, and that that post-trauma is maybe the insignia of painful memory that we are experiencing in the world.
Yeah. Yes, your mention of this forgetting pill, which has been discussed, I think, in some circles. I'm not sure if everybody has heard of that widely. I heard about it first a few years ago. But the idea that we could just take a pill and cause ourselves to forget, it just seems like it's opening such a Pandora's box, because that is the very thing that we can't predict, a few years from now or a few generations from now, how much we'll desperately need those memories, just as in the story of the Japanese man in the fields, which is a beautiful story, by the way. And I think stories are just so powerful for helping us to learn something. But you also mentioned the idea of how we tend to increasingly just sort of flip through websites and go very quickly from one to the next to the next. And there have been a number of books even that have come out recently that are talking about how that very thing is potentially even changing our brains. Like the plasticity of our brains is no longer as good as it used to be in order for us to be able to retain things and learn new things, because we can't read beyond a paragraph on a screen before we get distracted and go to something else. So it's kind of interesting how these so-called solutions that modernity is presenting to us, somebody's got a great idea for everything, but they're part of the problem. I mean, it allows, technology, for example, allows us to connect here we are now across the world from each other, quite literally, and discussing here. And then, of course, anybody who's watching this might be found in any far reach of the world. But I wonder if you can say a little bit just about the relationship, since we're on that topic, of between the human psyche and the machine, because this whole idea of, and modernity is more than machines. The pill is not a machine, but I think that this is a critical bridge into how we can begin to understand what it is that we're actually doing to ourselves on some level.
Yeah, we won't do without technology. And I don't think that we can, in general, most of us go back to or escape into an era without machinery, technology, etc. There are definite advantages both with machines and with technology. I think the question is one of balance. And we've always had machines. That has been part of the human development, to invent and develop machines as an extension of the hand, as an extension of the brain. I have personally no problem with that. My problem begins when the machine becomes the master. When it's true that also when man, mainly as the male, when man is master of the machine, the man may definitely abuse the capabilities of the machine. But when the machine becomes master, we move into a different era. The height, the peak of the modern condition in its transition to the postmodern era, I believe, was Auschwitz and Hiroshima. In Auschwitz, man, the master of the machine, perfected the machine, the killing machine. He mastered it to perfection. The killing became quicker and speedier. In Hiroshima, the remoteness signified, I think, the transition into the machinery of the postmodern era. When there is no face-to-face confrontation, but when by pushing a button from afar, and as you said, technology from afar can be beneficial. We can be here in Hawaii and in Israel, and we can have a direct, almost face-to-face talk, even though we miss out on some of those aspects of reality that have to do with touch and smell. They haven't been applied to the machinery yet. But there are these more horrendous sides to technology, one of which is the capability of killing from afar, the remoteness that Hannah Arendt spoke about already back in the 1960s, the remoteness that enables the emotional distance and enables killing and destruction at a much larger scale than when people had to fight, which was bad enough, face to face. So I think there is so much that we need to keep in memory, that we need to be aware of. I remember a patient who had gone through so much suffering in her early childhood. And she repeated over and over again stories, horrendous stories of what she had experienced. Unbearable to her, unbearable to the witness. But as she said, I need to remind myself over and over again of the pain that was there in order to be constantly aware of the meaningfulness of the life that I'm living.
Well, I think that you're pointing to something that we need to discuss and probably is the right time for it to come up now. And that is, in the midst of everything that's happening and this mass kind of loss of memory on some level, or the overwhelm that we're enabling on a day-to-day basis through all of these things that we're discussing, it points on some level to something that I've heard you talk about many times and that has had a really profound influence on my own thinking and writing over the years. And that is the idea of what you call a transient self. And the idea that we are not necessarily in our modern culture rooted in these images of interiority and reflectiveness that we need to be rooted in. And so when you tell me that story, I understand that she is rooted in something that, yes, it's painful, but the key idea there is that she's actually rooted in something. It's giving her some kind of context. And therefore, when we have context, we also have meaning. So can you say more about that idea of the transient self? Because I think this is such a critical piece of what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, I think one can put on a kind of spectrum the transient personality, if you're familiar with Jerome Bernstein's borderland personality, and post-trauma. Post-trauma is the phenomenon where we are in the grips of a traumatic experience and it works on us and we are unable to free ourselves from the horrendous experience. If you're familiar with post-traumatic dreaming, it's repetitious. It's kind of dreaming that often repeats the actual experience quite literally. in contrast to almost any other kind of dreaming. Most dreams have symbolic elements, even if they seem to emanate from a recent experience and have to do with day residues, etc. There's often a twist. There's often something added. Post-traumatic dreaming may often be the literal repetition of the traumatic experience. It is as if the dream as a sewage system, and I think we use dreams not only for the creative part of it, we also use dreams in order to get rid of much material. We use, because most dreams we don't remember. So, and they are as important, or they are important as well, not only the dreams that we remember, but the many dreams that we don't remember are very significant and important. We need them in order not to remember them. That's the forgetting part, to be able to get rid of certain things. And in that way, the dream serves as a sewage system, pouring out material that we need to get rid of, and it does go out into the ocean. Some of it does pollute the ocean. We need to recycle that as well. And we need to bring out all the material that's sent out into the ocean to remold at the bottom of the ocean, and we need to bring it back, some of it back, into the dreams that we do remember. But the sewage system as it enters, as we throw material down the sink, there is a certain diameter. And the post-traumatic dreaming, what happens is that the fluidity, the symbolism that's lost in post-trauma, and we know it certainly from Holocaust survivors who sometimes have lost their capacity for symbol formation, the symbolism, which is the juice, the water, the liquid, it's drained from the concreteness and literalness of the trauma. So the literalness of the trauma becomes solid substance and just does not go down the drain. So it rebounces, comes back the very same way, the very same literal way that it has been experienced. So there is a lack of symbolism in post-trauma. What remains is the literalness of the trauma, the pain of the memory. The borderland personality often attempts to reconnect with the nature that's been lost. I remember a patient who ran a small business that he had inherited from his parents, but he was totally uninterested in that business. He did pretty well because he was very capable, but decided to get rid of the business. He actually gave it away and went down into the desert, where he worked on a farm, where he tended to horses and camels, and where he occasionally made a living by bringing tourists on camels, walking them through parts of the desert. He had a need to reconnect with outer nature and with his own inner nature. The transient personality, I think, is the extreme of what we experience, what all of us experience to some extent in our present era. The ego self-axis has been replaced by a persona shadow axis. So I'll say a few words about that if you wish. The self, our inner core, our inner secret, unfolds by means of the ego. Just like the unconscious seeks to unfold, as Jung says, in consciousness. The self, our inner potential, seeks to unfold and does so by means of the ego. The ego is always limited. It's always partial. It does not entail the grandeur and the fullness and the wholeness that we can sense through the self, which is, of course, also the archetype of wholeness. The ego is always partial. But for the self to manifest, to find its expression, it does so through the ego. One of the main aspects of the ego, as we know from first grade in psychology, is to differentiate between the internal and the external. That's one of, when we look at ego functions, is a person able to differentiate between his or her internal experience and the external? That boundary is becoming blurred. We are bombarded by images generated by others or sometimes by robots. The images from our interior are being replaced in many ways. There's a certain atrophy, I think, since we are so bombarded. Our attention is drawn to so many of these external stimuli that we disengage from our interiority. And so the boundary between the internal and the external is becoming blurred. Reality is no longer only reality, and we may not exactly know what that is. It's becoming virtual reality and augmented reality. It's becoming qualified. And so the ego self-access, the rootedness within our interiority, with what we may call soul, self, that axis is becoming weakened. And what happens increasingly is that it's being replaced to some extent by an axis between persona and shadow. Persona, our appearance, our external appearance, and the shadow side, the side that we usually have often tried to avoid or not let free in the public field. With so many pseudonyms that people use on the internet, pseudonyms behind which they hide, which many hide, there is almost an explosion of shadow material coming out through the persona, because there is not enough of a regulating ego between them. Now, the transient personality is not concerned with memory, is not concerned with authenticity, is not concerned with being rooted in the self, but attaches seemingly very quickly, the transient personality is very well adjusted, can move from life situation to life situation, from website to website, from one phenomenon to another issue with incredible speed and ease, and seems to fit everywhere, can put on any kind of hat that the situation demands. But there is no regulating ego behind that. He or she is like an actor in life, like playing not the theater, but a film, what I call living in a photographic reality. It treats life as if it's not serious, not necessarily authentic, but if it's a constant video clip, as if it's something being filmed. The transient personality knows how to play that with the accuracy of the camera, but with a lack of understanding, depth, seriousness, and feeling. So the transient personality can move into another person's field and she seems and sounds as if really being there, but he moves away with just the same ease that he or she entered, because nothing has real meaning, nothing has real depth. And the self is also the archetype of meaning.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at here, what's arising for me at least, is the idea that we are no longer engaging. And part of that is due to trauma. And I think all of us are traumatized just by being on the planet, obviously, as human beings. It's the beginning of it. But also we are increasingly traumatized by our understanding, whether it's conscious or not, of what is happening to our culture, of the horrible stories that we're hearing on a daily basis, of everything that's happening and being just blasted at us through the media. And I think it seems to me like what we have lost because of this ongoing trauma is that a capacity to appreciate the living image, or to relate to these images as living images that can influence us, affect us, move us to emotion or to some kind of transformation or change. And also, this is the beginning of what Jung often referred to as symbolic thought, right? It's that capacity to think in metaphor, to think in poetry. And it's why mythology is so important to us, and dreams and being able to work with our dreams are so important to us. We have lost, or are increasingly losing, I would say, that capacity. And for me, it's the value of depth psychology and how all this comes back together again. And that is, I guess the question that keeps coming back for me over and over again is, what do we do about it, right? We can understand all of this, and it's fascinating to begin to dig into it, and the way that you've described it is really important, and I think very clear for me at least. But so the question remains, what do we do to change the prevalent condition that we are in right now as a culture?
First of all, I think you formulated that beautifully. In order to be in living reality, we need those depths that we attain from reflection, thinking, reflection, feeling, tasting, smelling, touching, and mythology, and dreams. That entire part of our interiority and in-betweenness, they are so significant for living reality. Living reality requires also the symbolic dimension. And what we can do about it, I think that we need to be conscious of it, which means that we need to have seminars, the ones that you create, like the ones that you create. We need to discuss it. We need to bring it into awareness. We need to not only resist or reject the trends and the developments that are inevitably are here and can be here in many ways for our benefit as well. But we can reflect upon the shadow of what's happening, which increases awareness. And I won't go into the dreams that someone shared in a seminar that I gave some time ago. But in that particular dream, and she has given me permission to share it, in that particular dream where she experiences the poisonous rain, the poison that's happening to the environment, the loss of the great mother, and the person in conjunction with whom the issue is resolved, the one who in fact comes to carry the great mother into safety, is a computer technician. So a balance between those developments that are happening and what I think we as depth psychologists can contribute to the field of psychoecology or eco-psychology, bringing the psyche into the awareness, to greater awareness, I think is something that can be helpful in keeping that balance.
Absolutely. And that is the work both of depth psychology and of each of us, I guess. Anybody who's listening to this today, I have to say, I think there's a call that is coming forth that is really profoundly important at this time in our lives. In fact, critical if we indeed want to change the way that we're going and just increase our consciousness around what our options are as well, because we do have options. I feel hopeful. You know, it's hard sometimes to think about all the things that are going wrong and wonder what exactly is going to happen. But there's so much to think about that's also wonderful. And particularly that's where those living images come in and the capacity for that symbolic thinking.
I agree with you, and I personally, I have my doubts, but also my hopes. And most of us are familiar with the quote by Jung that the human psyche needs to be studied because it's the cause of all future evil. Yes, we may cause a lot of evil unless we study the psyche. And bringing the psyche into the world is something that can create hope. And we do that in many ways, also by attending to our dreams, by, I like to call it restoring the self, to restore the self by means of the stories that we can tell and share and hopefully have a certain impact, a balancing impact on where the world is going.
That's a beautiful word. I like that too. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Erel. This has just been so fascinating. I wish we had more time to go on about this, but I know that a lot of these themes are found in your work, your writing, and you're graciously offering a chapter or an essay that is not widely accessible of your own writing, so people can download that. So we'll have a link for that. People can listen to this and then go find that essay and learn more. And I also highly recommend for everybody Erel's books. I mentioned a lot of them. They'll be listed in the bio, so you can go back and read those, or just Google him. They're all on Amazon or other outlets and venues. But really, I mean, your work, Erel, has just been, you have such an incredible body of work. And it addresses a kind of a broad range of topics, actually, but they all often come back to these same kinds of tenets that have, again, just been such a powerful theme for me, and I think are very global in their reach and very archetypal. So it's wonderful work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moni.
And just for everybody, just as a reminder, you can find, actually, Erel, you're very active on social media, so there we go. You can find Erel's work not only online, but you can also find more about him. Your website is www.eshalit, that's spelled E and then SHALIT.com. And of course, people I mentioned can buy the books under Amazon, and you have your own listing there of all your works. You're on Facebook, and people can look for you at erel.shalit. On Twitter, you have an account, Erel Shalit, and also you have a blog on your website, and that's at erelshalit.com. So I have a feeling, and I haven't tried this because I know where to find you, but I have a feeling if people Google you, you'll be there. So it should be easy to find you. It's great. Wonderful. Thank you again for spending some time with me today, Erel.
Thank you, Bonnie.